Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all the people who've spoken so far for their amazing and really heartfelt stories. I am going to share my screen with you because I have slides, which I hope will work. Okay, hang on a second. There we go. Hopefully that's working. So when I was thinking about what to speak about this evening and how to sort of introduce people to my new book, The Race to the Future, there were several things that cropped up, but the idea that kept on surfacing was the idea of improbable journeys, not least because the race to the future has an incredibly improbable journey at its heart. So, The Race to the Future stars a journey that was proposed by a Parisian newspaper called Le Matin, who in January 1907 announced on their front page that they wanted to challenge the automotive industry and drivers across the world to a challenge. They said that at the time, cars were, primarily being driven by the super wealthy, and when they were being raced on circular tracks, and this was an insult to the new technology, to this incredible new technology. They said that if the automotive industry was to have any hope of flourishing, it needed to be put to a sterner test. And the test that they propose was a race from Peking, now Beijing, overland through the Russian Empire and to Paris. Um, this is a challenging journey to contemplate even today, but in 1907, it really was the sternest challenge that the automobile had faced thus far. For the vast majority of this route, there would be no roads. There would be maybe tracks, particularly Mongolia, in the Mongolian plains, the rivers changed each, with the seasons. Their courses weren't particularly set, and so there weren't, accurate maps that could be gotten hold of in Paris. So this was an enormous challenge, and not only were roads, pretty few and far between for about the first two-thirds of the race. There were also no petrol stations. This was predominantly going to be a journey for petrol fuel cars. Uh, and fuel cars need fuel. So in order to get around this, they had to load up camels and donkeys and mules with petrol and take the fuel to strategic locations in the Gobi Desert and through the Russian Empire, and leave them there for the drivers to find. Um, as you can imagine, as this Parisian newspaper, Le Matin, started setting out this journey and how it might work logistically, there were just howls of derision from most of the world. Another newspaper compared the proposed Peking to Paris race as being akin to asking people to travel from Rangoon to the moon via telegraph wire. And people didn't think it would be possible. Part of the reason it was seen as so profound and even ridiculous a challenge was that 5 years before, 5 years before this race was proposed in 1902, a around the world journey had been begun. Dr. Lewis set off from London, intending to travel through Europe into the Russian Empire and onwards and all around the world. And he'd made it to Berlin in about 3 months, and then got stuck just past Moscow. The car that he was driving ran into a snowdrift and got stuck there, and that was the end of that. And this had been such a humiliating failure that it was referenced time and time again by people talking about the peaking to Paris. Nevertheless, 5 cars did turn up to the start line in June 1907 after not much planning, and off they went. And my book talks about their journey, how they made it or didn't, westwards to Paris. I suppose, spoiler alert, some of them did make it. But this was a highly improbable journey, and uh, you know, so I think that speaks for itself. Part of what made me want to talk about improbable journeys, and part of what made the Peking to Paris challenge improbable all on its own, was the automobile, which was still, in its very kind of in its adolescence, in 1907. The technology for the car, I think I should go back a bit. I think now we tend to think of automobiles as being kind of like of cars as being like the apex predator, in a way, that they were, of course, the best method of transport, and so of course they won out over everything else. But in 1907, this really didn't seem to be the case. That over the past century, most countries have been concentrating on building railways, and were still, heavily reliant on animal power. In fact, animal power had increased. The need for animal power had increased with the railway, because suddenly you have all these goods that are coming into major transport hubs, and they need to go that last little distance. So all these train companies had vast stables, in order to finish off that last little bit of transportation. And so this had a big impact on roads in a lot of places. So roads that had been essential for riders, messengers, carts to get from A to B are suddenly looking really old-fashioned. They're suddenly looking like, a relic of the past. And so particularly in places like, Russia, that were relatively well served by trains, the Trans-Siberian Railway had been opened. Roads had been allowed to fall into disrepair, and they were seen as sort of almost quite quaint. And the idea that a vehicle that absolutely required roads, and more than that, required really good roads, automobiles in 1907 were fairly, fairly prone to mishap. All drivers' guides and magazines of the time recommended that, if you were going on any sort of trip, that you take with you a vast quantity of spare parts and tools in order to fix the inevitable problems that would surface along the way. And that was on good roads. The thought that you would need that, countries that had just invested huge amounts of money in building, railways and canals and other transport systems, would then have to go back and build competing systems of roads that would then have to be, painstakingly updated and made smooth enough for automobiles, really seemed, pretty ridiculous. And this is why you find in 1907 people very confidently predicting that automobiles, that they sort of will find their level as being, akin to motorized racehorses, something of a diversion, something that doesn't really have a great deal of practical function unless it's for leisure. Um, and you know this this seems so strange to us today, and it would change. And the Peking to Paris race was part of what helped the car make this improbable journey from niche technology, something that the Economist wrote off as being, absolutely, something that was bound to fail, in contrast to the horse, and that prediction was made in 1907. The car suddenly then became, within a few short years, something that was considered pretty essential, and you get this huge reordering of cities to be built around the needs of the automobile and people who drive. Um, the third improbable journey is the most personal one, and that's why I wanted to come to it last. And that is how I came to write this book. As you heard from the introduction, my previous books were on color and textiles. I am not particularly mechanically minded. I don't know one end of the spanner from another. I'm ashamed to say I've never had to change a tire, and I've never done so. And so this seems like a very odd topic for me to cover, but I completely fell in love with it. It drew me in, and I had to write it. I found so many primary sources. I was able to track down the surviving family members of some of the original racers, who kindly shared with me their memories, photograph albums, and letters, which allowed me to uncover parts of the Peking to Paris story that had never been told before. I also had great ambitions to redo the journey with my husband, and we bought a Toyota Land Cruiser. That's the middle picture. Which we nicknamed Barbara. We took delivery of her in January 2020. We then spent the next 2 years, like everyone else, very much trapped at home. I was tearing my hair out, but luckily had done an awful lot of the research that I needed to do, so was able to concentrate on writing the book. But thought, okay, next year I'll be able to do the journey. Okay, next year I started learning Russian in order to feel like I was progressing in some way, and then in the autumn of 2021, just after I handed in the first draft of the book, I found out I was pregnant. I thought, okay, well, yes, you know, my child will be born within days of the anniversary of the start of the race, and that is the best time to do the journey because of the weather conditions. But maybe I can, babies are said to be very portable at that age. Maybe I can still do the journey. And then, of course, very sadly, war broke out, and when Russia invaded Ukraine, which has really meant that the journey is fundamentally postponed for the moment, although I would still love to do it one day. So uh, although I haven't been able to do the journey and to see the landscapes for myself, I was able to get over myself, to realize that it wasn't about me, to return to the research, and write to write this book, which I'm very proud of. I'm sure that avid motorheads will find all sorts of mistakes I've made, but I'm so pleased to tell the story of the race, and then also to draw out some of the themes that make this story so incredible. The development of the automobile, how horse-powered cities functioned in practice, and some of the incredible women who were right there at the very dawn of the motor age. So yes, I just wanted to say thank you for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed this talk. I know that the format doesn't allow for questions, but if you do have any, please do get in touch. I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.